Okay, why don't we get started? Let me introduce, pleased to have George Eberhart as our speaker today. He and his wife, Jennifer Henderson, are known and remembered for articles in Postcard Collector magazine and for attending so many postcard shows all over the country. Jennifer did a lot with recipe postcards. I'm sure many of you will remember her articles, maybe in Bar's News too. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but for sure in Postcard Collector. George had a career in the library world with the American Library Association, which was also in Chicago. His interest in UFOs and ghosts and all make him a natural for being our speaker today, just a few days after Halloween. Please join me in welcoming George Eberhart.
Thank you, Hal. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Are you ready for some high hilarity and wholesome enjoyment? I know I sure am. Today, I'm talking about a postcard category that I've never seen represented in any vendor's offerings at any postcard show I've ever been to: haunted places. I don't mean the haunted houses at carnivals or amusement parks. These are historic houses, hotels, restaurants, libraries, theaters, lighthouses, and other public buildings that reportedly harbor a haunt, a ghost, that is. Visitors or staff members sometimes see an apparition, hear spooky sounds, or feel a cold spot or a ghostly hand touching them. Haunted places are described in many different books and articles dealing with the paranormal, but with few exceptions, postcards depicting them rarely mention their spooky status. You just have to know, and perhaps maintain a huge multi-page cheat sheet like I do when I go to a postcard show. I've been interested in paranormal topics for many years, so when Jennifer suggested I collect postcards like she does, haunted places is one of the topics I came up with. We will now take a tour of some of those postcards, one for each US state, except for Idaho, South Dakota, Utah, and West Virginia. It's not they don't have haunted places, it's just I don't have postcards of them. But we'll have two for Kansas. I'll mention a little bit of the haunted history for each place, so grab your ghost gear and your spook protectors, because it could be a goosebumpy ride. The Edmund King House is a historic residence on the campus of the University of Montevallo in Montevallo, Alabama. It was built in 1823 by Edmund King, Jr. Upon his death in 1863, King's ghost lingered on in his estate for more than 100 years. His form could be seen late at night carrying a lantern through the courtyard to the graves of his wife and son. The ghost was also seen counting silver coins in the second floor bedroom and floating slowly across the floor. Once during a wedding reception, a huge white-robed phantom materialized from beneath the dining room table and drifted out an open window in the full view of the guests. The Golden North Hotel, that's it on the right, in Skagway, Alaska, was built in 1898 at the height of the Klondike Gold Rush, providing rooms for the 1,000 prospectors who passed through the city each week. One of them was Klondike Ike, who traveled to Skagway with his fiancée, Mary. Mary took up residence in room 23 at the Golden North while he headed out to the gold fields. Some say Mary fell ill. Others say she grew worried when Ike didn't return and she locked herself in her room. In any case, Mary died and she haunts the building, although it stopped being a hotel in 2002. Guests who stayed in room 23 reported a choking sensation, and the former hotel owner, Diane Whitehead, actually saw Mary looking out a hotel window as she and a maid were returning from a shopping trip. There have been haunted hijinks with light bulbs, and a bathtub developed a bath ring, even though no one had used it. The Birdcage Theater was a music hall, bar, gambling den, and bordello in Tombstone, Arizona that operated from 1881 to 1892. When the silver mines closed, the theater also closed. It now operates as a self-guided museum and ghost tour center. Visitors claim to have seen ladies of the night moving around the room and gunslingers drinking. They've heard phantoms laughing and talking. Bill Huntley, who managed the building in the 1980s, says he noticed that a dice table weighing several hundred pounds had somehow moved the night before. It was placed in front of a sign reading, "Don't disturb our 26 resident ghosts." It took 8 men to move it back to its former position. The Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, was built in 1886 as a resort for the rich and famous. It was later used as a college, a summer hotel, and a controversial health resort. In 1997, the owners put it through a 6-year restoration. It's billed as America's most haunted hotel and offers a ghost tour for a fee. One room is haunted by the ghost of Michael, an Irish stonemason who worked on the hotel while it was being built. He fell from the roof and died in the area that became room 218. Now he plays tricks with the lights and TV or pounds loudly from inside the thick walls of the room. Another ghost, a nurse dressed in white, has been reported on the 3rd floor. A gentleman in 19th century clothing haunts the bottom of the staircase and the lobby bar. Room 419 is known as Theodora's room, an ill-tempered clinic patient who threw guest clothes against the door. The confused ghost of Norman G. Baker, the entrepreneur who ran the hotel as a fraudulent cancer cure clinic in the 1930s, has been seen in the old recreation room and at the foot of the 1st floor stairway. The Hotel del Coronado is a historic beachfront hotel in the city of Coronado, California, just across the bay from San Diego. When it opened in 1888, it was the single largest resort hotel in the world. One famous ghost is the ghost of Kate Morgan. On November 24, 1892, she checked into room 302. It's now room 3227. She told staff that she was awaiting the arrival of her brother, but she was actually wanting to reconcile with her errant husband, who was supposed to meet her there, because she found out that she was pregnant. Kate was found dead on the steps leading to the beach 3 days later, an apparent suicide, shot through the head. Kate's ghost, wearing a black lace dress, has haunted the room ever since. At one time, the room was sealed off because so many guests reported unusual disturbances there, including cold spots, gurgling sounds, and footsteps. Both guests and employees have encountered apparitions. In a 1990s paranormal investigation using infrared cameras, 37 anomalies were found in temperature, humidity, and magnetic and electronic emissions coming from Kate's room. The Molly Brown House Museum in Denver, Colorado, was the home of American philanthropist, activist, and socialite Margaret Brown, better known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, because she survived the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The house was built in 1889 and purchased by Molly and her husband, JJ, in 1894. Their ghosts still putter around the home, going about their business, doing what they liked to do when they were alive. Staff and visitors have smelled pipe and cigar smoke, although there's no smoking allowed in the museum. Cold spots have been felt in Molly Brown's room, and her apparition has been seen as she goes around corners. The dining room, shown in this postcard, is where a female apparition dressed in Victorian attire likes to sit. When she's feeling energetic, this entity likes to rearrange the chairs. The ghost of a male servant in a grumpy mood has been seen in the mirror hanging near the stairs on the 1st floor. New London Ledge Lighthouse in Groton, Connecticut, is at the mouth of New London Harbor. The light was built in 1909 on the southwest ledge. The lighthouse is locally famous for the ghost of an early keeper named Ernie. The Coast Guard crew on duty at the lighthouse reported unexplained knockings at night, doors opening and closing repeatedly, the TV turning on and off by itself, the unexplained removal of sheets from beds, skiffs untying themselves mysteriously, coffee cups or radios moving around, and refrigerator doors slamming. No head keeper of the light has been named Ernie, whose name was turned up by paranormal researchers. Despondent over his wife running off with another man, Ernie supposedly cut his own throat and jumped off the upper level. His ghost is bearded and wears a rain slicker and round hat, as you might expect. However, investigators from the Atlantic Paranormal Society recently concluded that there was not enough evidence for paranormal activity at the lighthouse, despite a few cold spots. The Delaware Governor's Mansion in Dover, also known as Woodburn, has been the official residence of the governor since 1966. In 1790, Charles Hilliard III built Woodburn. The first ghost there appeared in 1805 to Lorenzo Dow, a Methodist evangelist staying there. He described an elderly stranger upstairs to the wife of the owner, but she told him that no one else lived there. Later on, she saw the same apparition. Another ghost is a man in a powdered wig who has a predilection for fine wine. Governor Charles L. Terry Jr. accused the ghost of draining off some of the vintage wines in the cellar. One of his servants saw the ghost helping himself to a decanter in the dining room. Earlier residents placated the spirit by setting out wine decanters, which mysteriously drained overnight. Another ghost is a little girl in a red checkered gingham dress. She was seen playing by the pool in the garden during the 1940s, but has never been identified. At the January 1985 inauguration party for Governor Mike Castle, guests complained of an invisible presence tugging at their clothing, and one woman saw the little girl in a corner of the reception room. The Octagon House in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood of Washington, D.C. was built in 1800. After the British destroyed the White House in the War of 1812, it served as the temporary residence of President James Madison for 6 months. The Octagon opened as a museum in 1970. Apparitions have reportedly been seen or felt in many spots, including the spiral staircase, the second and third floor landings, the third floor bedroom, and the garden area. Visitors, curators, and other museum employees are among the eyewitnesses. The ghost of First Lady Dolly Madison has been seen in the front hall and drawing room, and the smell of lilacs is noticeable whenever she is around. The building was firmly established as a haunted house by 1888, when 12 men decided to spend a night there to either expel the ghosts or prove the legends wrong. They heard feminine shrieks, a clanking of sabers, and phantom footsteps. Museum Superintendent Alric Clay claimed in the 1960s that spirits would often turn on the lights and open doors late at night. The sound of rustling silk can be heard on the main staircase. The hanging lamp in the main hallway swings by itself, and one curator reportedly found the tiptoeing tracks of human feet in the undisturbed dust of the top floor landing. Whitehall is a Gilded Age mansion open to the public in Palm Beach, Florida. It was completed in 1902 for Henry Flagler, a leading developer of Florida, as a tourist destination. This postcard features Whitehall's Italian Renaissance library. The building now houses a museum of artifacts owned by Flagler, who, when he was 72, engineered a divorce from his second wife so he could marry his 34-year-old mistress. Not everyone in the family approved of the new spouse, and the dispute lasted beyond the grave. When the museum opened in the 1960s, the possessions of former family members who belonged to opposing factions could not be placed in the same display case. The objects would mysteriously move to other locations. Sometimes plates or other breakable objects would just explode inside protective covers. The ghost of his mistress, Mary Lily Keenan, has been seen at the museum ladies' room and upstairs hall. The Old Pink House is a restaurant and tavern in Savannah, Georgia, that was built in 1789 as a private residence for James Habersham Jr. In 1812, the home became the first bank in Georgia, then an attorney's office, a bookstore, and a tea room. The new restaurant opened in 1971 after extensive renovations. James Habersham only haunts his former home between October and March. Nearly all the Old Pink House restaurant staff have run into him. Sometimes he's seen wearing colonial garb and drinking ale. One witness recounts that he often straightens table settings and puts chairs into their plates. Someone else commented that sometimes if a server leaves her station kind of messy, he'll come back when there's no one else down there and it'll be perfectly straightened up. Apparently, another spirit in the Pink House enjoys playing pranks on some of the diners. Menus, which are placed upright in the middle of the table, will fall forward towards the guest for no reason. Often the menu will hit a glass of wine, knocking it onto the table or into the lap of the person enjoying their meal. The Iolani Palace was the royal residence of the rulers of the Kingdom of Hawaii, located in the capital district of downtown Honolulu. The building was used as the territorial and state capital from 1893 to 1969. It was restored as a museum in 1978. The palace was the site of the overthrow of the Hawaiian throne and the imprisonment of Queen Liliuokalani. Many died during this turbulent period, and it's said that the female spirit who wanders the grounds outside is a product of that violence. She's sometimes seen in the summer as a glowing white figure roaming the courtyard near the fountain. The tour guide recalls bringing a group on a guided ghost tour in downtown Honolulu on a Sunday evening in 2006. The group stopped by the King Kamehameha statue across the street from the palace. From that vantage point, the guide spotted the silhouette of a Hawaiian woman peering out from the window of the second floor bedroom. The garish colors on this 1970s postcard depicting that steak joint in Chicago's Old Town do not do disservice to its Victorian style elegance. The restaurant was in existence from 1962 to 1996 and shared a wall with Chicago's famous Second City Comedy Club. The restaurant was haunted by many ghosts. Regular seances were often held upstairs in one of the dining rooms by notable psychics and celebrities, including sportscaster Jack Brickhouse's wife. Some of the activity in the building included shadowy figures, movement of objects, strange sounds, and cold drafts, especially on the central staircase. The management had a problem keeping night help. One second floor waitress was grabbed by the wrists and dragged screaming along the carpet to the brink of the stairs to be left with a heel broken off of her shoe and deep fingerprints around her wrist. The manager and a busboy heard her and did a thorough search for a perpetrator, but found no one. She quit that evening. A bartender came face to face with a pair of glowing yellow eyes while working on the books one night. The building now houses the Adobo Grill, which has not publicly reported any hauntings. The Willard Library in Evansville, Indiana, is probably America's most famous haunted library. It first opened in 1885, but no haunts were experienced until 1936, when a custodian quit after repeatedly encountering the ghost of a lady in gray in the basement. Since then, janitors, employees, and patrons have all reported seeing the ghost, feeling cold spots, or smelling the perfume of the elusive ghost near the elevator, near the restrooms, or in the children's room. Library director Greg Hager said there have been reports on the second floor of chairs being pulled away from the tables after being meticulously pushed in, and file boxes jumping 3 feet or more from the shelf as if pushed or thrown. A former custodian also once heard typing coming from a corner of the second floor, but the library was closed. No one was in the corner, and there was no typewriter. In 1999, Hager and a local newspaper editor came up with the idea to set up a webcam that sent a live picture to a server every 30 seconds so that it could be viewed on the internet. There are now webcams in 6 different locations that can record any odd observations. According to Hager, the Gray Lady's most recent appearance in the original building was in 2010. A new edition opened in 2015, and so far the library staff has only received 2 reports of strange goings-on there. The Matthias Ham House is a 19th century house in Dubuque, Iowa, built by shipping tycoon Matthias Ham in 1840. Ghostly manifestations have been reported there since it opened as a museum in 1964. A window in the upstairs hall opens by itself, and footsteps are heard racing from the second floor to a tunnel in the basement. An invisible presence has been sensed by custodians and tour guides. Electricians have been unable to find the source of a problem that turns lights off and on and causes organ music to be heard coming from the light sockets. The organ, which hasn't functioned since 1964, has been heard playing by itself when an employee attempted to shut off the porch light. Now, Kansas. A bevy of ghosts haunt Fort Leavenworth. Established in 1827, it is the oldest permanent settlement in Kansas. Several ghosts populate the rookery at 14 Summer Place, the oldest building at the fort, completed in 1834. The apparitions of a busybody old woman, a bushy-haired old man in a white robe, and an angry young girl with unkempt, scraggly hair disturb residents trying to sleep here. One story involves an Air Force colonel who lived here with his family in the 1970s. On the day they moved in, his wife felt invisible hands push her down a few steps in the basement. They also broke her fall, so she wasn't hurt. The same day, the daughter's beloved collection of Smurf dolls disappeared from the box they were packed in. When the colonel was fixing up her room later, he found all the Smurfs lined up side by side on the bed rails. A few days later, the daughter was playing outside when she saw a pale woman in an old-fashioned dress standing with a 6-year-old girl. The woman called the daughter by name and said they were ghosts who need your help to leave this place. Another family's experience was with a Christmas tree that a ghost apparently did not like because it kept getting pushed over until they tied it securely with a rope. Wichita, the Carey House, also known as the Eaton Hotel, is a historic building completed in 1887 in Wichita. Its haunt is known as the Blue Handkerchief Ghost, which has a fondness for roses and rose-colored items. As the story goes, a young prostitute was killed in the hotel in the 1920s or 1930s and the culprit never found. She's said to walk between the second and third floors, take phones off the hook, and brush by people. The KFH sports radio offices used to be in this old building, and former news director Steve McIntosh says one time he thought he saw a figure in his peripheral vision, but nothing was there when he looked. Ashland is the plantation of statesman Henry Clay in Lexington, Kentucky. Using the profits of his forced labor farming, Henry Clay began building this federal-style house around 1806. His white-haired ghost, dressed in black frock coat, has allegedly been seen in the original red parlor room, now his study, leaning against the fireplace mantel, perhaps looking at all his achievements and just enjoying the mansion. Le Petit Théâtre du Vieux Carré is a small professional theater in the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana. It was founded in 1916 when a group of amateur theater lovers began putting on plays in the drawing room of one of the members. The theater is home to an estimated 40 distinct ghosts. Witnesses say they often feel icy cold air in certain areas of the building. People who have taken photos in the theater often capture strange optical phenomena like floating orbs or strange ghostly silhouettes. The most common ghosts are those of Union soldiers who wander through the halls. One particularly vain soldier has been seen standing in front of a wall, fixing his uniform as if he was looking into a mirror. The ghost of a nun has startled the cast quite a few times, especially when they were performing the play Late Night Catechism. Cast members were surprised when the nun mysteriously appeared behind them, only to give them a slap on the back before disappearing into thin air. One of the more frightening ghosts there is that of an ex-theater manager who committed suicide in the office lounge. Employees who work late nights get the unnerving feeling of being watched by this angry spirit, which sometimes bangs on the doors and drawers. Some theater patrons have heard the gentle sounds of a piano echoing through the halls, which may be the ghost of composer Louis Moreau Gottschalk, who played music in the building when it was a dance hall in the 19th century. Matinicus Rock Light is a lighthouse on a windswept rock 25 miles off the coast of Maine. First established in 1827 as a pair of wooden towers, the present surviving granite structures date to 1857. When Horace Beck visited the light in the 1950s to research his book, The Folklore of Maine, he was told by the Coast Guard that a door in the North Tower was kept locked to keep a ghost inside. They told Beck that many years ago, a lighthouse keeper had hanged himself in that tower, and since that time, his spirit could be heard roaming through the tower on dark, windy nights. The ghost also broke dishes, slammed doors, and made equipment malfunction. The crew on the island learned the only way to control it was to keep the North Tower door locked. That ghost story continued until at least the 1970s, when men stationed on the island claimed a strange light could be seen coming from the abandoned North Tower on dark nights. The crew nicknamed the ghost Mo. This version of the USS Constellation has been residing in retirement in Baltimore Harbor, Maryland, since it was decommissioned in 1955. She was built in 1854 as an exact replica of the earlier ship. The frigate is haunted by 3 ghosts. One is a sailor in an old naval uniform who is seen on the forecastle deck. His appearances were so regular that Lieutenant Commander Alan Ross Brougham took a blurry photo of him on December 27, 1955. That was published in the Baltimore Sun 4 days later. The image was believed to be an officer. The second ghost is Sailor Neil Harvey, sometimes seen on the orlop deck. He was strapped to a ship's gun and blown to pieces for falling asleep on watch in 1799. His uniformed apparition appeared to a Catholic priest touring the ship in 1964. The third ghost is Captain Thomas Truxton, who was the commanding officer of the first USS Constellation and had ordered Neil Harvey's execution. Other activity includes ghost lights and the sound of footsteps and voices on the lower decks. Constructed in 1845, the Jared Coffin House is a historic mansion located in the heart of downtown Nantucket, Massachusetts. Now a hotel, it was the first mansion ever built on the island. The spirit of an older man often appears sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace to relax. Some speculate that the spirit is Jared Coffin enjoying time in the home he built. Jaws author Peter Benchley encountered his ghost when he lived there in the 1960s. He described it as an elderly man with long hair dressed in 18th century clothes. Others think that the older man isn't Coffin at all and that Coffin's ghost is really hanging out in room 223. The spirit seen in that room resembles images of Coffin. Perhaps this is the area where he slept for a brief time he was in his mansion. Another apparition appears as a Puritan woman, noticeable by her attire, who visits the rooms of unmarried couples who are sleeping together and tries to frighten them. She yanks the covers off the couples while they sleep. Many of them awake to see the woman standing over their bed, which may be enough to keep them sleepless the rest of the night. The Big Bay Point Light is a lighthouse that stands on a tall bluff over a rocky point near Big Bay, Michigan, on the Upper Peninsula. Built in 1896, it continued as a manned light until 1941. Since 1986, it's been a bed and breakfast. The beacon was returned to the lighthouse in 1990, and it remains operational. The initial report of a haunting surfaced when the B&B opened. One of the owners was sleeping there during a gale when he heard a banging outside. When he went out, the banging immediately stopped. He went inside, but it began again, and this happened several times. A few days later, a cleaning woman heard someone taking a shower in the basement, even though the water was turned off. Two guests were later startled to see the faint image of a man dressed in the uniform of a lighthouse service keeper walking restlessly around the grounds. It stared right at them as it faded away into nothing. The Guthrie Theater was founded in 1963 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The theater is haunted by a ghost of a former usher, Richard Miller, who killed himself on February 5, 1967, in a parking lot while he was wearing his usher uniform. Within weeks, patrons in row 18, part of the area assigned to Miller, began complaining of an usher constantly walking back and forth. They described Miller down to the large mole on his cheek. Since then, dozens of patrons, employees, ushers, actors, singers, and custodians have seen Miller's ghost in row 18, in the catwalks, or in an exclusive section called the Queen's Box. The ghost follows witnesses with his eyes or head, but never speaks or makes a sound. An exorcism performed in 1994 supposedly placated his spirit, although an investigation in 1996 detected odd electromagnetic readings in row 18. The building where these experiences occurred was torn down after the 2005-2006 season. The theater then moved to a new ghostless facility. This postcard shows the old theater interior. Longwood is a historic antebellum mansion in Natchez, Mississippi. Samuel Sloan, a Philadelphia architect, designed the home in 1859 for cotton planter Haller Nutt. Work was halted in 1861 at the start of the Civil War, and Nutt died of pneumonia in 1864, leaving the work incomplete. Longwood survived decades of neglect and near abandonment to become one of Natchez's most popular attractions. Haller and his wife, Julia, relished the new attention lavished on their former home and have been known to startle tour guides. Julia is seen and heard on the staircase, while Haller prefers the garden area. One groundskeeper quit after seeing Nutt standing under a tree. Paranormal investigators have picked up spirit voices in the children's room. The Savoy Hotel and Grill is a historic hotel and restaurant in Kansas City, Missouri. Built in 1888, it is the oldest continuously operating hotel west of the Mississippi. The Savoy has at least two ghosts. One is an elderly woman named Betsy Ward, who haunts room 505. She died in the bathtub there, and now she returns to take showers. Residents have reported that the shower curtain closes on its own and the faucet turns on by itself. In the 1990s, manager Sean Burns was walking past room 505 when he heard jazz music playing. He met the room guest downstairs in the lobby as he was coming home from work and mentioned he heard the music. It turned out the music was coming from the flip-on radio, which is always turned to a classic rock station. In this case, the radio switch had been flipped on and the knob turned all the way over to a jazz station. The Copper King Mansion is a 34-room home that was built from 1884 to 1888 as the Butte, Montana residence of William Andrews Clark, one of Montana's three famous Copper Kings. A cold presence seems to haunt the game room. A cheery presence is felt in the old chapel and ballroom and can be a bit of a tease with people who are fearful of spirits. A light-colored thing that floats and moves around has been reported in the basement and the first floor hallway. The house is now a bed and breakfast, and its proprietor insists there are no ghosts there. Designed by New York architect Bertram Grosvenor Goodhue in 1920, the Nebraska State Capitol building in Lincoln was completed in 1932. Its 400-foot tower can be seen up to 20 miles away. Visitors to the interior rotunda's dome observation deck report hearing the sounds of a man sobbing, usually on the southeast side of the building. There are several likely candidates for the Capitol ghost. One is a prison inmate who had a heart attack in 1968 while stringing Christmas lights on the outside of the dome. Another possibility is a man in the 1950s who fell 10 floors when he leaned too far over the railing of the spiral staircase. People sense that they are being watched and have felt unseen presences keeping them company. Witnesses have seen a black mist on various stairways throughout the building. Of the 100 saloons in Virginia City, Nevada, the Delta Saloon was the most famous for its gaming room where Bonanza Kings played Pharaoh. The suicide table here is haunted by the ghost of Black Jake. This notorious gambler owned the Delta Saloon in the 1860s. One evening, he lost $70,000 at the Pharaoh table, where he committed suicide by shooting himself. Afterward, players at the table reported seeing the ghost of Black Jake putting a gun to his head. The second owner is said to have killed himself at the table as well. Soon, no one would sit there, and it was retired from use. It was converted into a blackjack table in the late 1890s, and its stark reputation was forgotten until one stormy night. A miner who had been cleaned out of some other gambling house stumbled in half drunk. As the story goes, he gambled a gold ring against a $5 gold piece and won. He played all night long, and by morning had won over $86,000 in cash, a team of horses, and an interest in a gold mine, everything the owner of the saloon had. The owner's suicide retired the table for good, and it's hanging there like it is now, I think, still. Built in 1881, the home of John E. Seiss in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, was expanded in 1885 and opened as the Seiss Inn Hotel. Suite 214 was haunted by a peculiar spirit. Sometimes the room door would not open, no matter what key was used. At other times, the door was found open for no apparent reason. Trails of ice cubes led from the ice machine into the empty suite, where the ice would be found scattered on the floor. Once, a potted plant flew off of a coffee table, which prompted a terrified guest to demand an unhaunted room. Another guest reported that someone invisible had laid down on the bed beside her. A rocking chair started moving by itself in the middle of the night in the guest breakfast room. All the windows were shut, so there was no breeze. After an elaborate renovation of the property in 2014, the building reopened as the Hotel Portsmouth. The new owners are silent on whether there have been any phenomena since the renovation. Phyllis Parker, the female ghost at the Bernardsville, New Jersey Public Library's former building, was so active that the staff issued it a library card. Beginning in 1974, employees started seeing an apparition moving through the front rooms of the library building, which was a tavern during the Revolutionary War. The ghost is said to be that of Phyllis Parker, the innkeeper's daughter, who suffered a nervous breakdown when her British spy boyfriend was executed. The last known Phyllis sighting took place in November 1989 when a 3-year-old boy saw a lady in a long white dress in the reading room and said hello to her. In 2000, the library moved into a new modern building, leaving the home of the library ghost, which now hosts a performance academy. The Lodge Resort and Spa in Cloudcroft, New Mexico, had its origins in 1899 as housing for railway employees. It was originally known as Cloudcroft Lodge until 1909, when it burned to the ground. Its second incarnation was finished in 1911. With paranormal tourists, the lodge is a pilgrimage site, all due to the ghost of a woman named Rebecca. Paintings and stained glass representations of her hang throughout the resort, and the restaurant is named after her. Rebecca was a beautiful young maid with striking blue eyes and red hair, murdered by a jealous lumberjack at the inn in the 1930s. She is a flirtatious spirit who likes to use the telephone in the governor's suite, room 101. Guests in that room sometimes receive phone calls from nowhere, and operators say that the line in that room is often lit up even when no one is in the suite. Guests in room 104 also report hearing her voice and seeing her standing beside the bed wearing a long dress. Her presence is also felt in the Red Dog Saloon, where ashtrays move by themselves and flames appear in the fireplace with no logs or other source of fuel. Sunnyside is a historic 1835 house on 10 acres in Tarrytown, New York. It was the home of author Washington Irving, best known for Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Irving's ghost has appeared in his former home. Several years after his death, 3 witnesses saw his apparition walk through the parlor and disappear into the library. His ghost also favors the tower, known as the pagoda. On June 26, 2010, 14-year-old Rachel Lambert and her family were visiting Sunnyside when Rachel saw something strange in a window of Irving's cottage. She snapped a picture and moved on so as not to miss any of their tour guides' fascinating historical speech. When Rachel got home the next night and viewed the picture on her 27-inch screen, she was able to make out a figure that looks like the head and upper body of a ghost holding a quill pen. The lodge on Lake Lure is on the shore of Lake Lure in western North Carolina. The ghost here is George Penn, a highway patrolman shot and killed by 2 criminals in 1937. The lodge was built in his memory as a retreat for state troopers and their families. The bed and breakfast owners in the 1990s first heard of a haunt in room 4 when a guest informed them that a man had been walking around in her room. When she said, "Wrong room," he walked out into the hallway. She woke her husband up, who pointed out that the bedroom door was closed and locked. The inn's previous owners admitted there was a ghost who occasionally throws objects like glass goblets or potted plants across the room. The Liberty Memorial Building is located on the state capitol grounds in Bismarck, North Dakota. Completed in 1924, it's the home of the North Dakota State Library. The library offices occupy a basement area where the stacks of the North Dakota Historical Society were housed from 1924 to 1981. Society archivists reported strange presences, footsteps, and voices that they nicknamed the Stack Monster and attributed to Indian bones stored in the collections. Feelings of dread, inexplicable footsteps and voices, and strange shadows have plagued workers. Current library staff have reported no activity. The National Museum of the U.S. Air Force is located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. One World War II bomber at the museum is a B-24 nicknamed the Strawberry Bitch. The aircraft saw quite a bit of action during the war. Strange noises are known to come from the ball turret of the plane, the place where the waist gunner was positioned. It is said to rattle, and a shadowy figure has been seen inside. Some visitors believe they've also detected odd lights moving inside the plane. Its ghost is said to be one of the meanest and most violent spirits residing at the museum. A custodian who used to work on the premises in September 1991 said she felt someone was following her. She turned around and something slapped her in the head. The Skirvin Hotel is in downtown Oklahoma City and the city's oldest hotel. When it opened in 1911, it was the grandest in the Southwest. In 1930, it added a new wing. At this time, a young maid leaped from the building from one of the upper floors with her infant, killing them both. Dark rumors circulated that the owner, William Balzer Skirvin, had an affair with the maid, but this is unlikely. The spirit of the maid has been seen numerous times. The employees call her Effie and claim that she likes male visitors. Guests have heard her disembodied voice, sometimes saying seductive things, or witnessed her apparition, with at least 2 accounts saying that she was naked. Heceta Head Light is located on the Pacific coast, 13 miles north of Florence, Oregon. Built in 1894, the lighthouse is the strongest light on the Oregon coast. The assistant lighthouse keeper's house is now operated as a bed and breakfast. It's said to be inhabited by someone nicknamed the Gray Lady, who often appears as either an elderly woman or a grayish smoke-like figure that quickly dissipates. She floats across rooms and through closed doors in the caretaker's house. Sometimes she screams in the middle of the night or rattles dishes in the cupboard. Some of the earliest tales involve workers building the lighthouse. One man refused to finish a particular room and would only work on its window from the outside, even after he broke it. He wouldn't even go inside to clean it up. The owners then heard the swishing of a broom and found all the broken glass swept up into a neat pile on the attic floor. 2 of the more credible witnesses of this ghost are Oregon scenic photographers Steve Terrell and Larry Geddes, who were staying at the B&B. At one point, they briefly spotted what looked like the figure of a woman in the window of Geddis's room. When they later discovered there was absolutely no one at the building at the time, Geddis became visibly disturbed. Later, Terrell said, they discovered some small objects in the room had been moved. Mashulu is a four-masted steel bark built as Kurt at Port Glasgow in Scotland in 1904. The largest remaining original windjammer, she is currently a floating restaurant docked in Penn's Landing, Philadelphia. The ship has at least 3 ghosts, one of which, known as the Lantern Ghost, occasionally lights the candles in the lanterns on the 52 dining tables during the day. The staff only lights them at night, and they sometimes have relit themselves after getting snuffed out by the waitstaff. Another ghost wanders the upper deck. Late at night, restaurant staff have heard soft, unintelligible words coming from the deck. There's also a laughing woman on board who performs after all the diners have left, often coming from the women's restroom. Block Island is in Block Island Sound, Rhode Island, approximately 9 miles south of the mainland. It's the home of the historic Southeast Light, shown here on this postcard. The area around the island has been the site of numerous shipwrecks. The Palatine Light is a ghost ship reported off the island. The legend comes from the historical shipwreck of the Princess Augusta. The passengers were German immigrants, Palatines, from the Palatinate region. Their water supply was contaminated, causing a fever influx that killed 200 passengers and half the crew, including the captain. Gales pushed the damage and leaking Augusta to Block Island, where it wrecked amid a snowstorm on December 27, 1738. No remains of the wreck have ever been found, and there is even some evidence that the Augusta may have been repaired and sent on to Philadelphia. The legend was immortalized by poet John Greenleaf Whittier in his poem, The Palatine, which faithfully adopts the traditional story in verse. On the Saturday between Christmas and New Year's Eve, there are still sporadic reports from the locals of seeing a burning ship sail past. The Victorian home that now houses Poogan's Porch Restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina, was built in 1888. The neighborhood was residential for 100 years. One of its former residents was Zoe St. Armand, who lived there with her sister Elizabeth for 4 decades. Elizabeth died tragically in 1945, and Zoe became so upset and delusional that she started to cry out her sister's name while wandering frantically down Queen Street. Neighbors became concerned and finally took her to St. Francis Hospital, where she spent the rest of her life. Shocked women have reported encountering Zoe as they leave the ladies' room. They take one last glance in the mirror and see her image behind them. One morning, as the chef was opening up the restaurant, he set his coffee mug on the stairs. Later, he noticed that the cup had disappeared. He gave up looking for it and got a new cup. Moments later, he found the original one had returned to the stairs. Only this time, it had lipstick marks on the edges. Rugby is an unincorporated community in Morgan and Scott counties in Tennessee. Founded in 1880 by English author Thomas Hughes, Rugby was built as an experimental utopian colony for expatriate second sons of the English gentry. While Hughes's experiment largely failed, a small community lingered at Rugby throughout the 20th century. Built in 1882, the Thomas Hughes Library is the most unchanged of all the buildings. The library's 7,000 volumes were donated primarily by a Boston bookseller. The library still houses most of the original books and magazines. German-born colonist Edward Burtz, Rugby's first librarian, organized the collection in the 1880s. When historic Rugby was being restored in the late 1960s, Burtz's ghost appeared to preservationist Brian Stagg and provided hints on how to restore the library to its original shelf arrangement. The Menger Hotel in San Antonio, Texas, was built in 1859, a mere 23 years after the bloody fight at the Alamo. Many famous people enjoyed its perks and hospitality. Theodore Roosevelt is said to have recruited Rough Riders in the Menger's bar. The spirit of a maid named Sally White is occasionally seen walking the halls. She wears an old long gray skirt with a bandana around her forehead. Texas musician Kinky Friedman once wrote about his stay at the Menger while on the road. He detailed a 3 a.m. lengthy encounter with Sally White. The one-time owner of the King Ranch, Captain Richard King, still turns up in his old room, the King Suite, usually going right through the wall, not where the door is now, but where the door was located before the room was remodeled. Unseen entities have been known to help in the kitchen area, as various utensils have floated through the air by themselves. Guests in rooms on the north side overlooking the Alamo mission often report seeing reenactors, a woman in white, Mexican soldiers, and campfires with Native Americans. Goldbrook Covered Bridge, also known as Emily's Bridge, is a small wooden covered bridge in the town of Stowe, Vermont. Its nickname comes from the tragic tale of Emily, a young lady who grew up in a poor family in Stowe. When she was a teenager, she fell in love with a young man from a rich family. The parents forbade it, so the couple planned to elope, meeting first at the covered bridge. But the man never showed up, so Emily either hung herself or had a fatal accident at the bridge. Her ghost is said to linger there, waiting for her fiancé to show up. Many people crossing the bridge have reported hearing shuffling footsteps and whispers, as well as seeing a white figure at the other end. Visitors driving across at night have heard an inexplicable scratching sound on the sides of their cars. Local historians point out there are no records of a suicide at the bridge, nor is there any evidence of a girl named Emily in Stowe, ever. Nancy Stead, a columnist for the Stowe Reporter, claimed credit for starting the legend in the 1970s to scare local youths from wading in the creek. Due to the frequent ghost hunters, the town passed an ordinance in 2013, making it a violation to park near or on Emily's Bridge at night. The Rising Sun Tavern is a historic building in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It was built about 1760 as a home by Charles Washington, the youngest brother of George Washington, and became a tavern in 1792 and a museum in 1907. Upstairs, a spirit or two likes to turn the lights off and on, or even unplug them. Once the museum curator was getting ready to close the museum, so she turned off the upstairs lights. As soon as she went downstairs, the lights on the second floor all popped on again. After going up and turning off the lights 3 times and having them pop on again, she stomped up the stairs and told the spirit doing this to stop, scolding harshly. To her great surprise, a spirit pulled the rug she was standing on out from under her, and she crashed to the floor. She wasn't hurt, though. Spirit Lake is in Skamania County, Washington, located north of Mount St. Helens. It was a popular tourist destination for many years until the volcano erupted in 1980. This postcard shows the lake in 1975, pre-eruption. The lake's always been avoided by Native Americans who believe they heard voices coming from its depths. A monster named Siatko was said to live there, and a ghost elk was believed to lure men close enough so Siatko could grab them. The Pfister Hotel is a luxury hotel in downtown Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Owned by Charles Pfister, it opened in 1893. Pfister's portly, smiling figure has been seen surveying the lobby from the grand staircase, strolling in the minstrel's gallery above the ballroom, and standing in a storage area on the 9th floor. The apparitions match a portrait of him in the lobby. Reports became widespread in July 2009 after several visiting Major League Baseball players refused to stay there because they experienced disembodied voices, knockings on the door, poundings on the headboards, footsteps, and stompings. Window blinds went up and down by themselves. TVs, iPods, iPhones, air conditioners, and other devices that run on electricity seem to have minds of their own. Some ball players even reported an apparition. Well, too bad none of them got into a fight with it. Then they could claim that they engaged in fisticuffs. Sorry about that. I thought we all could use a bad pun right about now. The Sheridan Inn in Sheridan, Wyoming was constructed in 1893 by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad. Buffalo Bill Cody managed the hotel for the railroad from 1894 to 1896. The inn is haunted by the spirit of Catherine Arnold, or Miss Kate, a housekeeper who lived and worked here between 1901 and 1965. Miss Kate's presence is felt most strongly in her former room on the 3rd floor, near the front downstairs windows, or in the ballroom. Sometimes she's detected as a moving cold spot. At other times, only her soft footsteps are heard. The owners have preserved her room just as she left it and interred her ashes in the wall above her favorite chair. I sent Dennis William Hauck a copy of my article, Phantoms Among the Folios, that appeared in the October 1997 issue of American Libraries magazine, because I had used his book to identify many of the haunted libraries that I featured. He sent me this postcard back, which shows the first edition of his National Directory of Haunted Places. Some of the descriptions I've used to accompany this talk came from the 2nd edition of this book, in 2002. That's all I have. I hope you can now appreciate that there may be more stories concealed in the seemingly mundane images of a mansion or a hotel on postcards in your collection. And I haven't even gone beyond the United States. The United Kingdom probably has more haunted places per square yard than any other country in the world. Thanks, Hal, and everyone for the opportunity to blab on and on about ghosts. I do appreciate it. Do we have time for questions?
You bet we do. Bill, what do you have there for us?
16 of George's locations that appeared in postcard history were in our queue for future articles. I don't know who wrote that. Must be Ray Hahn.
Yes, I did type that in. As a matter of fact, at the very first image in the presentation was the one that came to mind, and I thought, well, I'm going to count just for the fun of it. And the total is 16. The Birdcage Theater and the Menger Hotel are in our queue for future articles. So I might be contacting you, George, for additional information.
You may do that. I'm a font of information.
Where is the haunted house that you showed in DC?
The Octagon. I don't have the address, but I think it's in the Georgetown. No, it's in the Foggy Bottom area, if you know where that is. It's not too far from Georgetown.
There's an article in Postcard History about that house.
Don't rain on this parade. Come on.
You need to buy the entire back issues of Postcard Collector, I think, and Postcard History.
I think it's Clarissa wrote, I spent 2 nights in the ship Constellation in Baltimore with a group of Girl Scouts. We had regular guard rounds during the night. The ghost did not appear. Maybe too many people on the boat? Where were they seen in the 50s?
Well, it said there was one on the orlop deck and the other on the forecastle deck. And the other one is just wandering around vaguely. But of course, I have stayed in a lot of haunted bed and breakfasts and never seen a thing. So it all depends on your own personal mindset. I don't think spirits appear to me that often. I heard some strange noises in one in Pennsylvania, in Gettysburg, of all places. But I don't think it was anything really spooky. You can hear strange noises in old houses quite a bit. As far as the Constellation, you're not going to get ghosts all the time. And apparitions themselves are pretty infrequent. You're more likely to hear strange noises or footsteps or feel cold spots. Apparitions are pretty rare in haunted houses. So just because you're staying in a haunted place doesn't mean you'll get to see anything spooky. Sorry.
Dolores Rowe wants to just confirm, have you personally seen a ghost?
I did see one when I was a kid. I grew up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now the haunted capital of everything, even though it wasn't then. Nobody knew about ghosts in Gettysburg. I was living in a house on the battlefield on Confederate Avenue. On the 2nd floor, I was about 8 years old. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I looked over to the door of my room, which was painted black. It was open and it was painted black, and I saw a white figure against it. It really kind of looked like Casper the Friendly Ghost, like it was somebody with a sheet on and eye holes cut out. But I felt it looking at me. I think it was as real as anything I've ever seen. And it looked at me. I put my head under the covers. That usually doesn't help at all, by the way. I looked out again, put my head under the covers, looked out again. And then I saw it slowly moving out past the door and into the hallway and down the hallway. After being totally stunned for about 20 minutes, I heard my father get up and go to the bathroom. And I said, Dad, guess what I just saw? And he humored me steadfastly. We went and looked around in the other rooms to see if there was anything we could find, but no, it was gone. And so the house is in town on the battlefield, so it could very well have been a soldier. There are many reports of ghosts in Gettysburg now, and they do talk of a battlefield Civil War soldier ghosts. That's my only story.
Hal Holloway said, is the Mr. Flagler of Florida the man who's responsible for the Alligator Border Card series? Or am I confusing him with someone else?
That Henry Flagler, that must be the Flagler. He also had a railway. He was a railway magnate. He had his own railroad. If that's the same one, then maybe it is.
Alligator border postcards?
Alligator border? No, it must
Big
be.
alligator border postcards are an idea that George Adams has pretty much examined.
John Adams.
John Adams, that's right.
Okay.
They're not the same person.
Have you ever been in any of these buildings? I mean, besides the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, we have stayed in, looks like we've stayed in 4 of them. That's correct. The Hotel Del Coronado in California, we stayed there once. The Big Bay Point Lighthouse in Michigan, we stayed there overnight. The Menger Hotel, we were there at least once, maybe twice. I can't recall for certain. And Rugby, I've been to that library several times, and we also stayed in one of the places in Rugby, historic Rugby, that is allegedly haunted. Didn't hear anything at either of those. We've also been to the Copper King Mansion and the Nebraska Capitol, but we have stayed in 4 of those places.
Is there a master list of these places? How did you find out about them?
Well, as I said at first, I keep a cheat sheet. It's right now it's on an InDesign page with probably about 150 pages, single space typed in. It's got all sorts of other things, but it's not even really up to date because I probably stopped populating it in around 2001 or something like that. But I do have a master list of places that I've found in books on haunted places. And so that if I am at a postcard show and I'm going through Colorado and I see something, I can check my list and see if it's haunted or not. That's the only way you can do it. I do not have an encyclopedic memory for all this stuff, so I need a cheat sheet.
Now, here's a good question. The architecture inside many of the early 1900s places was just so elaborate, detailed, and amazing. Can you say more about the inside decorations in any of these designs, and maybe they contributed to the haunted nature?
Well, that's an interesting idea. I don't think I've seen that anywhere in the literature, but it's possible that buildings back then were more haunt friendly. It's also possible that haunts are, whatever they are kind of shy of electronic equipment, although they seem to be able to turn them on and off at the worst of times, like in some of the ones I mentioned. Yeah, like in Chicago today. But it could be that they're more conducive to whatever it is that haunts are, that they're able to inhabit these areas, or maybe the consciousness lingers on, if that's the case, in the wood frames of elaborately carved doors. That's a good question, but I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to much about ghosts, really.
Okay. Robert Bell says, I remember my grandmother visiting Lilydale, New York in the 1960s. The town was known for various spiritual activities. And as I remember it, have you seen cards from there?
Yes, I have several Lilydale cards. One shows an apparition, I think, of a Native American. The other is just some of the houses, I think, and the gate to. Of course, I think I'm getting this mixed up with Camp Chesterfield in Indiana. I have cards of that too, but there are some Lilydale cards, and I think you can still find them in places at postcard shows. I have a book on Lilydale, and pretty much those people were out to take your money, spirit mediums and so on. They really were. Maybe some of them were genuine, but for the most part, they did the normal kind of tricks that a psychic would pull at a stage show. And they would get you to think that you were contacting your long lost relatives when they were just channeling their own inner selves. So beware, that sort of thing did go on and probably still does go on at Lilydale. Although I've heard that there were 1 or 2 genuine psychics that inhabited the place for a while.
Well, that's all I've got.
That's great. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, George.